That night, the Sentinel, Matrona, and Kogar all got needed rest in the Sentinel's lab home. That morning, silence filled the living room as the Sentinel sat on his couch, snapping his fingers, creating a spark of purple each time. Matrona and Kogar watched from a safe distance. "You should remember," Kogar spoke under his breath. "What the hell did Thomas do to you?" The Sentinel happily continued to snap his fingers. With a swing of his arm and a loud snap, the room exploded with bright purple light, causing a spark to appear in front of Kogar, pushing him to the floor with an extreme force. A long silence followed the ear-piercing explosion. Kogar righted himself and dusted himself off. Matrona stared in disbelief, as did the Sentinel, staring at his own hands. Wide-eyed, he blinked rapidly, suspended in disbelief. The room remained silent as Kogar attempted to raise himself up. "That was awesome," the Sentinel breathed. "Yeah, I'm fine, thanks." Kogar laughed, breathing heavily. "Sentinel," Matrona said. "What? He said he's fine." He gestured at Kogar's scorched chest. "See? He's fine." "Yeah, I'm doing just great," Kogar groaned. The Sentinel stood up and clapped once. A larger spark created a small flame in his hands. He passed the flame between his arms. He spun himself while moving his arms up and down, creating a trail of the flames. A stray flame made its way up the Sentinel's sleeve. His clothes caught fire and he panicked. Although it didn't hurt him, he threw his flannel shirt to the floor and stomped it out. Standing still, he looked down at his flannel. Something about him not wearing it reminded him of something, almost like a lost memory. He ran to a closet. He dug through his clothes until he spotted a dark blue hoodie. He pulled it over his arms and zipped it up. "What's with the hoodie?" Matrona asked. Kogar smiled, recognizing it. "It's an invention of mine, made it when I was gone. It's fireproof, and, if I remember correctly..." The Sentinel flicked out his arm. A metallic circle made its way to his wrist. It tightened. Metal and wires spread across his hand to create a sort of exoskeletal gauntlet. "Sentinel, how long were you gone?" Matrona asked. "That must have taken a while to make." "Only took a few months." "Months? I mean, it wasn't that long compared to the 5... The Sentinel paused. All at once, he understood what exactly had happened to him. He understood the extent of what he had forgotten. He turned to face Matrona. "I didn't remember most of it, really. I lost track of time." "Sentinel," Matrona fumed. "How long were you gone?" Kogar cleared his throat as an obvious move to try to diffuse the tension. "Hey, maybe this isn't the best time. I could go back to Ilios if you want me to," he said as he slowly made his way to the door. "Stay," Matrona demanded Kogar. "I'm going to ask again." She walked up close to the Sentinel. "How long were you gone?" 5, he muttered quietly. Matrona stared at the Sentinel with a look of betrayal on her face. "Sentinel, please." He sighed. 5 years. Matrona slapped him across the face, and the room fell into silence. Kogar sat down. The Sentinel held his hand to his face. "Matrona," he conceded quietly. "I'm sorry." "No, Sentinel, no, you don't understand. I was promised adventures with the Sentinel when I was just 5 years old. My family abandoned me and left me with that absolute jerk of an adopted father, and I waited. I stayed with him for 20 years waiting, just waiting for when I could finally live my dream, and when I finally see the light at the end of the tunnel, you go and waste 5 years of your life without me? You could have died. You left me here. What if you never came back?" "Matrona, I didn't know. I don't even remember most of it. I did come back. You were supposed to be here for me. You're the only father I've ever known." Matrona looked at him directly in the eyes, pausing for a few moments. "Why couldn't I go with you? You changed from the father I didn't want to my childhood dream in an instant, and then you left me?" "You're right. You're not responsible enough for a time machine. I thought you changed for the better. Now you're just a different kind of asshole." "Matrona, I didn't know. I want to travel with you. It's just, I ran into a few problems, and I don't even know what kept me there. I don't know why I stayed so long. I can't remember, but I'm here now, and I won't leave you again." Matrona shook her head and walked away. The Sentinel sat on the couch as she left the room. He held his head. "I'm her father?" the Sentinel whispered to himself. He looked up at Kogar. "How much did I forget?" Kogar floated up and made his way to the Sentinel. "Adoptive," Kogar said. He shapeshifted flawlessly into a stocky human form, complete with a red shirt and cargo shorts. His short brown hair sat on top of his squared head. He sat down on the couch next to the Sentinel. "I knew you'd forget a little bit of our time together, but I didn't know it would be so scattered and so much of it. I'm sure Thomas had his reasons." "Who?" "See, now that one makes sense," Kogar chuckled. "So, what are you going to do now?" "I don't know." The Sentinel stared at his hands. "I guess I should probably figure out how to use this stuff." A small spark shone at the end of one of his fingers, and it quickly faded. "Whatever it is. Plasma." "What?" the Sentinel asked him, confused. "It's called plasma. That purple fire. Crystal in its purest form. Electric in its natural state. Flame in its most common use among the Gars. Gaseous and deadly in its darkest form. White or invisible in its parasitic emotional form," Kogar informed him, standing up. "Unharnessable and destructively powerful when concentrated as a black star. It's the fabric that weaves reality. You really don't remember any of it, do you?" "The 5 years. I don't really want to think about that right now. Let's just get back to this plasma stuff. Kogar shook his head. You remember me? Yeah, the Sentinel nodded. Do you have any memories about me, with me, anything? I trained you to fight using plasma. You were good. Really good. The Sentinel looked away. A sharp pain stabbed at his head as he tried desperately to bring up any memory at all. His face became distorted with confusion. Oh, I don't like this at all. My brain's been through too much, you know? Yeah, must feel weird, Kogar said. He walked to the kitchen. The Sentinel followed. We were friends during those 5 years, you and me. I showed you how to control plasma with Rex's help. Who? The Sentinel sat down at his stool. Do you remember how you forgot those 5 years? How your memory was wiped? Because there's no way you forgot all those years. You know about Iliosiferium and the larger issue there. Kogar stood at the other end of the Sentinel behind the kitchen counter. I don't, but I get what you're saying. It's like not all of it's gone. It's been selectively and systematically erased. My knowledge is compartmentalized. So all the training we had, the safe house in California. Kogar looked up at the Sentinel. He looked back down, disappointed. I've never been to California. Right, that's what I thought. Kogar took a deep breath and puffed his chest out. All right, I guess it's training time again, isn't it? Maybe we can jog some muscle memory. But how are you going to teach me? The Sentinel asked. Kogar sparked a flame in his fingers and tossed the plasma back and forth. He threw the fireball up, catching it in his mouth and breathing a pillar of flames from his mouth that went up to the ceiling. The plasma dissipated quickly. He looked back down at the Sentinel. I'm a Gar. You may be a carbon-based life form, but I'm a plasma-based life form. It's in my blood. That's my ceiling, the Sentinel whined. Stop complaining and let's go. Kogar made his way around the counter and through the living room. He walked out to the backyard, which sat on the edge of a beachside cliff. The morning Manhattan fog disrupted the view of the ocean, but the morning sun still managed to cut through. The Sentinel stretched his back and his arms. Kogar widened his stance and slowly began lifting his arms up, as if he were picking up a boulder. In front of him, a wall of shining purple crystal extended from the ground up. He stopped raising his arms and the wall stopped extending. Kogar wiped his hands, content with himself, and turned around, smiling. The Sentinel looked down at the uprooted grass and loose dirt around the base of the crystal wall. He chuckled. Come on, you're just determined to destroy my home, aren't you? Yeah, why not? Kogar approached the Sentinel and grabbed his hand with a gauntlet around it. He lifted the Sentinel's arm and pointed it outwards toward the wall, turning his hand so that the palm faced the crystal. He patted the Sentinel's arm and held out his hand, signaling to keep his arm steady. The Sentinel looked forward at the wall with focus. Plasma is all about precision and focus. It knows you. Much like your box knows where to teleport because you think it, Plasma knows what to do because you think it. You're connected. You work together. You talk about it like it's alive. The Sentinel smiled. His arm was shaking. It's my culture. The originals hold it in high regard. It's what we're made of, what gives us life, what ties us to the gods of the extraverse. Kogar stood next to the wall and put his arm on his waist. Alright, so focus and blast this wall with a... The Sentinel closed his eyes and was pushed back immediately with the force of a massive fireball that shot from his palm. The ball hit Kogar in the chest and pushed him off the cliff. The Sentinel shot up from the ground in a sweat, worried. He ran forward. He stopped when Kogar flew back up the cliff in his Gar form. Kogar looked down disappointedly at the Sentinel. I missed. The Sentinel laughed sheepishly. I know. Kogar tried to hold a straight face. He laughed and shifted back into his human form, landing safely on the ground again. Okay, let's try again. Matrona sat in her bed, leaning against a corner with her legs up to her chest and her arms wrapped around them. Her gaze wandered to the top of her dresser, to an old, worn-out journal. She got up, went to the dresser, and flipped open the journal, reading from a passage. Right. Okay. She smiled and closed her eyes. Come on, Matrona, this is what you've been waiting for. She paced around the room. Why else would Mom leave you like that? She stopped pacing. It doesn't matter that he was gone, it matters that he's here, she told herself. She looked out of her window. The Sentinel and Kogar both were controlling a spiral of plasma, laughing together as it flew through the sky and eventually made its way crashing into the crystal wall. She smiled. He's here. She turned around, put her journal down, and walked out of her room. So what else can I do with this plasma stuff? The Sentinel asked Kogar, while staring at a small flame in his hand. The crystal wall in front of them was well beat up from all of the hits it took. The Sentinel clapped his hands and rubbed them together, putting out the flame. How'd you make that solid stuff? The Sentinel gestured toward the wall. You know, with the crystal? That's kind of advanced, but we could try. Kogar held his hands out in front of him. Hey, how's it going? Matrona caught the attention of the Sentinel and Kogar. She was leaning against the backyard doorway at the end of a short set of concrete stairs. She walked down the stairs when the Sentinel saw her. Still mad at me? The Sentinel turned back around and held his hand out in the same way Kogar did. Can you blame me? Matrona stepped closer. So what are you up to? Just a little thing I like to call being awesome. The Sentinel flicked his hand up before Kogar could tell him what to do. A small explosion burst near Kogar's ankle, causing him to flinch and punch the Sentinel in the shoulder. Thrilling. Matrona rolled her eyes. Hey, I'm pretty good at this. I just messed up. Sure. Matrona crossed her arms. I bet you got real good at it when you were gone for 5 years. Oh, he did. Kogar rested his hand on the Sentinel's shoulder and pushed his arm out from the elbow. He turned the Sentinel's palm face down. He was a little bit of a prodigy. He even tried flying with it. I remember when he got a face full of blue sand. I have no idea what he's talking about, for the record, the Sentinel claimed. You can't blame him for being gone, though. Kogar. The Sentinel signaled Kogar to stop. No, hear me out. Kogar pushed the Sentinel's arm down slowly, and with it, what was left of the crystal wall began to sink into the ground. There was this guy, a friend of ours. He told the Sentinel that he needed to be gone for 5 years, and it was against his will. He couldn't bring you either. But he's back now, and he's back for you. Kogar flipped the Sentinel's hand over and let go of his arm. The Sentinel lifted his arm slowly, and the wall of crystal began to push itself from the ground closer to the Sentinel, and it was refreshed, as if it snaked its way underground. The Sentinel let his hand down, admiring his crystal wall. So are you still mad at me? Yes. Matrona pushed her hands into her pockets. But I at least understand now. She looked away. I forgive you. Aw, thanks. The Sentinel smiled. Look, I really am sorry. I get it. Kogar looked back and forth between the two of them in the silence that followed. He breathed in and put his hands on his waist. Well, he smacked his lips. Now that the sap is over with, Kogar. The Sentinel glanced Kogar's way. I guess we can get back to practicing, Kogar continued. Can I watch? Matrona sat down on the steps, leaning her elbows back on the threshold. Sure. The Sentinel turned around and squatted down. Prepare to be amazed. He jumped, lifting his arms. A small chunk of solid plasma shot from the ground and hit the Sentinel in the face. He stumbled back. Ha! Kogar clapped his hands together and laughed. Sentinel! Matrona stood up. I'm fine. The Sentinel held his face. I'm fine. He shook his arms and hopped subtly up and down on his toes, hyping himself up. I got this. He lowered his arms and scooped them up like he was picking up a heavy bag. Flames flew up from beyond the cliff, flying into a spiral in the sky. Nice. Kogar commented, staring up. The Sentinel turned his palms to the ground and pushed down. The flames dived back towards the cliff, hurtling themselves towards the three of them. Sentinel? Matrona stepped back cautiously, nervous. I got this. He prepared himself. Look, you're not trained well enough. I don't think that... Kogar looked up at the quickly approaching flames. The flaming spirals came crashing down, spreading on impact, but Kogar was able to push them away from the Sentinel, Matrona, and himself. He accumulated all of the flames into a ball of plasma, solidified it, and dropped it to the ground. Okay, that was not meant to happen? The Sentinel stared at the crystal ball of plasma. What exactly were you trying to do? Matrona asked, still shocked at how close the flames were. I was gonna make a shield of plasma come from the ground to stop it. Stop trying to show off. You're gonna kill someone if you keep going without training. Kogar wiped off the dust that was pushed up from the ground. Alright, let's try again. More focus, more restraint. Kogar helped the Sentinel train throughout the morning, only taking a break for lunch in the afternoon. Night was approaching, and Matrona was coming back to check on them, only having done it once before. Still going strong, huh? Yep. The Sentinel gracefully trailed a streak of bright plasma across his arm, twirling it through the dark, juggling the flames, and solidifying it into crystal shard that shattered into several shards that embedded themselves into the ground. He is remembering some of his training. Kogar admired the shards. I guess a few things just stuck. Hey, Sentinel. Matrona pushed her hair back. Do you want to go anywhere? Why? The Sentinel asked, his gauntlet retracted into his hoodie sleeve. I mean, I've waited my whole life to travel with you, and you just kind of left for 5 years, so... Okay, but it wasn't 5 years for you, Sentinel. Kogar stopped him. Right. Okay. Gotta make those 5 years up to you somehow. The Sentinel sighed. Right, so... He thought about it for a second. New Earth. How's that sound? The Sentinel walked past Matrona and back into the lab house. I don't know, what's it like? Matrona followed the Sentinel and Kogar followed her. No clue. Let's find out. The Sentinel picked up his box. If you have no clue, then how do you know it exists? Matrona asked. I'm just sort of remembering the name for some reason. Kogar looked at the Sentinel with a raised eyebrow and his head tilted. He didn't recognize the name. The Sentinel held out his hand for Matrona. She was quick to take his hand, but Kogar hesitated.